Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I'm Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sal himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Usually terrific.
A warm welcome to you all. Our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and we talk about all sorts of issues. And today we are going to be talking about the tension between Uganda and Rwanda. So welcome all your comments later on in the show. Let's begin by going to a comment, Shaka, here from Wako. Why is Uganda and Rwanda not at peace at the border?
Well, obviously because the two individual rulers of those two countries, I guess each of them feels like, like a big fish in a small pond.
What could be causing this tension?
I think, first of all, really, you're talking about countries that are led by essentially governments that do not, at least according to all the data I have seen, that do not reflect what you would call social, economic, political justice for their people. You're talking about individuals who are essentially too powerful. Individuals, frankly, that need a system, at least that reflects some kind of checks and balances. And in the absence of that, I am reminded of a former French ruler, king, as a matter of fact. I think it was King Louis VIII, who said he was simply too much and he had been intoxicated with the power to the extent that he said, you know what, I am the state and the state is me. Laissez-moi.
Interesting.
For those who are interested in
how
French.
about, for example, earlier today, the Rwandan Foreign Minister, Mr. Richard Sezibera, was saying that Uganda is harboring some rebels opposed to Kagame's regime. They are blocking goods and services from going to Uganda. And the foreign minister in Uganda, Mr. Sam Kutesa, responded and said that all those allegations are not true. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you have to wonder whether, in fact, you're talking about incontrovertible evidence here. I mean, if the minister of Rwanda, you're talking about Dr. Richard Sezibera?
Correct.
The minister of Foreign Affairs, a man who grew up, as a matter of fact, in Namutamba. The last time when he used to be Rwanda's ambassador to the United States, living in this capital here, I used to refer to him as someone that came from the Namutamba Institute of Diplomacy. Very, very diplomatic. Very nice guy, actually.
I miss him being here, though.
Yeah, he obviously has to say something, and probably, who knows, maybe, in fact, what he is saying has some kind of legs, but we don't see those legs yet. He has to provide us with those types of legs so that whatever he's saying at least can be seen to be working. On the other hand, when you talk about the Ugandan Foreign Minister, Sam Kutesa, Kutesa, he's doing his job. Maybe because there is no obvious evidence or whatever, but I think it is his duty, for example, to deny that there is anything just like what, in fact, is being alleged by Dr. Sezibera.
Shaka, let's not beat about the bush here. Some critics have said that this is not the first time these two countries are going at it. They fought before. For example, they fought in Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, in 1999 and in 2000, and a lot of people died.
In Kisangani.
In Kisangani, a lot of people died.
As a matter of fact, the international criminal, was it not the International Criminal Court? It is the International
Court of Arbitration
of Justice.
Yes, yes.
It actually weighed in, and Uganda owes at least $10 billion to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it has never paid.
So I remember covering one of those conflicts. I was one of the reporters who actually reported on the clashes between the two countries. It's something that was sparked off by just, I guess, for lack of a better word, poor management of soldiers. There were errant soldiers who started this whole thing, and a lot of people died. But going fast forwarding to today, we see a similar situation that people are coming up with these reckless statements, accusing each other. This could potentially lead to another clash.
Yeah, because first of all, let's face it, what has changed in fact since then? Nothing much has changed. You still have those two principles in place. In Kigali, you have Major General Paul Kagame, retired but certainly not tired. In Entebbe State House, you have General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, retired, but certainly, of course, as you know, not tired. And you have these two individuals with very huge egos. Again, like I said a little bit earlier, they are at a disadvantage in the sense that they do not have government systems which reflect checks and balances in terms of how they exercise their power. So really, it's like they have no boundaries, no borders in terms of what they can actually decide to do to one another.
If I had you correctly, you talked about egos. Is it about egos or it's about national interests here?
Well, it depends, Ben. First of all, we're talking about decisions that are being made by these very powerful individuals. We are talking about egos, obviously, and we are also talking about perhaps being a little bit reckless, because let's face it, each of them is supposed to be looking after millions of human beings. And again, when you think about it, you look at the Rwandans and Ugandans, they are really like brothers and sisters. They go way back, you know, to those good times, for example. I mean, these two individuals, for example, at one time, they belonged to the same rebel group in Uganda.
They are comrades.
They were supposed to be comrades, and they were. Kagame was in the National Resistance Army, which was led by Yoweri Museveni, which seized the power in 1986. And then after that, Kagame worked in the Ugandan government. He was actually a sort of middle-level intelligence officer in the NRA. And eventually, you know, the Rwandan component of the NRA essentially went to fight for their way back, their right to go back to the land of their ancestors, Rwanda, in 1990.
How would you respond to Nambilirwa Mona Amina? Yes, I would think both leaders are egoistic in nature at the expense of the people. That led us, what cannot be settled or amicably is applying social and economic justice for all in terms of those two countries.
I know that there are a lot of people in those two countries who don't want to hear this operative word, which is really, again, democracy. What is needed in each of those countries is democracy.
But wait a minute, what we are talking about is not democracy. These are two borders, two countries that go beyond a democracy here.
You see, if there was a democracy in each of these countries, it would be difficult for the individual rulers, really, to make these types of reckless decisions, decisions that put in harm's way their people. And these are two individuals, by the way, when you think about it, Paul, who constantly talk about their belief in what they call Pan-Africanism.
Or the vision thing.
The vision thing. They talk about regional integration. And in fact, they are both members of the East African community, which is supposed to essentially bring about a region bring about laws and rules and regulations which help each of them to harness their potential and their resources and what have you for the benefit of their people. But here we are, we're talking about, in fact, some of these countries spend probably a lot of money actually buying bullets, buying tanks, APCs, AK-47s, to do what? To kill each other.
Well, one could argue that that's it's in their national interest to protect their own citizens.
Who's the national interest?
Both Museveni could argue the same, and Kagame is entitled to arguing the same way because they have the right to protect their own people.
I think what is not deniable is that these two leaders do not get along, with each other really. I think that first of all, to tell you the truth, I remember back in 1999. I remember sitting in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, in the officers' mess, where you could sit on white leather chairs. We were 3 people. It was then Vice President and Defense Minister, Major General Paul Kagame. I remember he actually came driving himself in a black Mercedes-Benz. And there was the late Colonel Patrick Karegeya, who was the chief of external intelligence.
Now deceased.
Now deceased, who was, of course, really, by all the facts that we have seen, all the evidence, was actually assassinated, really, or murdered, whatever you want, in the Michelangelo Hotel in Johannesburg. The two were talking about, for example, how their Ugandan brothers and the senior brothers, they referred to them, pretty much treated them like kids. They were treated like kids, as if in fact they were supposed to be subordinate to them. And it was very interesting because it reminded me of a friend of mine, a Ugandan journalist by the name Haruna Kanabi, who at one time used to edit the Chariot newsletter. I'm sure you remember it. And in fact, at one time, he wrote a very interesting piece saying that the authorities in Rwanda were actually subordinate to those in Uganda, to the extent that he actually said that the Rwandese Patriotic Army, for example, the RPA, was like essentially an extension. RPF was the front, but the armored wing was RPA. He said that they were basically like an extension of Uganda, to the extent that they were like a region of Uganda, a district. And for that, he was actually arrested and detained in Ruzira for several months.
But those are some of the reckless statements that ended up leading to the first Kisangani war between Uganda and Rwanda.
The reason I'm saying that is because when I was in that Kiyovu officers' mess in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, I was actually being told by then Vice President and Defense Minister Paul Kagame about that they felt that somehow their sovereignty was not being respected. And this is, by the way, when I was there, it was after the first round of the two countries fighting, and guess what? As you said earlier, on foreign territory, Democratic Republic of Congo. But then again, you see, they also thought that they had the right probably to do that actually in that country, because if you remember, those two countries also came together in terms of fighting in that country and toppling Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga and installing Laurent Desire Kabila, who there are a lot of indications that they may in fact have been, in a sense, responsible for probably his exit.
Shaka, you come from a border town, right? The hotspot right now. That's your hometown, correct?
I come from Kabale. I've always said I'm a Kabale kid, yeah.
Okay, so what's at stake? Why would it be in the interest of Kagame to shut the border, to stop vehicles coming in from Uganda? People depend on border trade, cross-border trade. It's always, in some areas, it's a porous border. People cross over. You have kids going to school in Uganda, you have kids going to school in Rwanda, and vice versa. So there is so much going on. Why would it be in the interest of an individual ruler to shut down the border?
I think that from his vantage point, there must be what he considers to be a compelling reason. Because let's face it, in fact, when you look at the steps that he has taken, you would probably, say this is a man who is about to commit political suicide. I'm saying that because, let's face it, when you talk about Rwanda closing the border, Rwanda is, just like Uganda, is very much landlocked, to the extent that it receives, for example, its imports, which come through Mombasa or Dar es Salaam. It has to receive them through Uganda, or it has to receive them through Burundi. And you know the relationship between Uganda and Burundi and Rwanda is not good. And then he has a problem also with the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo to a certain degree. Then Tanzania also, that kind of stuff. So it seems to me that he's virtually, he has virtually, in fact, essentially helped his adversaries to surrounding him, so that he has actually isolated himself from the rest of the region.
There's a Facebook comment from Serex Rain, who agrees with you. He says, which neighbor? Burundi? Rwanda is at loggerheads with Burundi, Tanzania, and Congo. Maybe if these two leopards can fight each other, maybe they can sort themselves out.
You know, there are some Rwandans who believe that when they look at themselves, especially the Tutsi community, they sort of somehow feel that they are like Israel, the Israelis, who are able to survive in the Middle East, surrounded by people that are not so friendly. So sometimes Rwanda thinks that it has the military capacity, for example, to figure out its own way in that particular region. I don't really think that there is sufficient evidence to agree with that kind of way of looking at things. But I think that at the end of the day, the way forward, sincerely, is for the two countries to have negotiations, really. In fact, not only with the two countries, Kagame has also to figure out a way of living together with a neighbor called Pierre Nkurunziza, the president of Burundi, whether he likes it or not. Because let's face it, how long can he, in fact, be able to somehow isolate himself politically and still expect to survive? Because let's face it, he will need, for example, to export, his goods and what have you outside of Rwanda. He will need
export coltan, which they don't produce.
Rwanda does not produce coltan.
But they're the biggest exporters.
I don't know whether that still is the case, but it used to be the case. In fact, there were times, even in terms of diamonds.
Correct.
And the last time I checked, Rwanda does not have diamonds, neither is, in fact, Uganda. But they used to be some of those top countries for exporting some of those resources. He will need, in other words, really, he needs to be part of that region. He needs to be able to get along with his brothers and sisters and what have you. It's not only in the interest of him as an individual, but in fact, it is for the benefit of his people and the people in the region. But I think that there must be, again, a compelling reason. There have been reports, for example, that there is a Rwandan armed group. In fact, I think the Rwandan foreign minister.
Right. I was actually going to go to a comment of just in relation to that. Going back to some of the points that you made earlier, talking about Uganda supporting RNC, the
Rwandan National Congress.
Yes, the one that is supposedly run and owned by.
Not owned, I mean...
led by the former general, Kayumba Nyamwasa, Lieutenant General.
Once a general, always a general.
Correct, yeah.
General
But at the same time,
who obviously at one time used to be the Rwandan Defense Chief of Staff.
yeah. At the same time, Uganda has also accused Rwanda of infiltrating its intelligence apparatus. For example, that led also to the firing of the former Ugandan Police Inspector General, Kele Kihura, as a result of him opening doors for Rwandan intelligence guys to come into Uganda and kidnap Rwandese who are taken back to that country. So how do you balance the two? Each country is accusing the other of doing some sinister stuff in their respective countries.
You have a point, obviously, because it's not only, in fact, beginning with General Kale Kayihura, but Rwanda had actually been in control of the Ugandan intelligence for a very, very, very long time. They had the ability, they had the capability of monitoring whatever was going on in the country of the Republic of Uganda, which Uganda, the kind of luxury that Uganda did not have. But then again, you also have to go back, by the way, to the neighbor after the Ugandan elections of 2001. You had this group called PRA, which was supposedly training in Rwanda. And yeah, there are people who talk about how it was a phantom, how it did not exist and what have you. But there is a lot of compelling evidence, for example, in fact, incontrovertible, because there are two very important names that come to mind that you and I know about. There were two lieutenant colonels. One was Anthony Chakavali. Anthony Chakavali, who used to be, of course, part of the National Resistance Army and eventually Uganda People's Defense Forces. There was also another lieutenant colonel called Samson Mande. These two individuals at one time, they found their way in Sweden, in the Scandinavian countries, in Sweden. And the reason they end up there is precisely because they were supposedly leading PRA operating in Rwanda. So they were actually negotiations which involved Rwanda, Uganda, and the international community, to the extent that these two gentlemen ended up, in fact, in Sweden, except that the last time I checked, one of them is back in Uganda.
So could Uganda be using that scenario that you just painted, maybe it also to support a rebel group to overthrow Kagame in Rwanda?
Well, first of all, there are allegations that Kagame was working with some elements to essentially effect change in neighboring Uganda. And perhaps, in fact, being part of a group that would have liked to not only change in terms of a different government, but also change at the top. Somebody to replace the current Ugandan, head of state, Yoweri Museveni. I don't think that he's amused by that himself. So I think when you think about the history, you talked about how those two countries have already fought, not once, but twice. Mind you, during that fighting, there is incontrovertible evidence also to show that there were so many people who lost their lives, who died on both sides, but that on the Ugandan side it was even more. I was actually even told by Lieutenant Colonel Samson Mande, who happened to be the commander at the time of the Phantom RPA and stuff like that later. He says that there were, what you would call huge mass graves in the eastern DRC, where a lot of these Ugandans were actually buried.
Interesting.
And so there are people who have said that Yoweri Museveni is not the kind of person that will forget that very easily. In fact, they have even used the word that is a Runyankore Ruchiga word, calling Enzigo, something to say with somebody that cannot really forget what harm you have caused him and all that kind of stuff, and probably thinks about getting an opportunity to essentially make you pay back.
But how about people who say that these two countries, or these two leaders, President Yoweri Museveni and President Paul Kagame, are great friends? We've seen videos of them at family events, visiting each other's farm. They've known each other from the time they were young boys. These guys who have grown really to like each other. How do you put that in context?
Those are optics. They call them optics, pictures.
And Kagame looks up to President Museveni as elder brother.
Well, there's no question that at one point Kagame would probably have looked at Museveni as a big brother, as a mentor, and all that kind of stuff. But some of the people who claim to know about these people much better than I do have told me, for example, that Yoweri Museveni used to feel more comfortable with a General Rwigema,
who was killed
in 1990.
Yes.
He was initially, originally the commander of the initial Rwandan Patriotic Army offensive to Rwanda.
One of the first casualties of the war.
That is correct. As a matter of fact, from what I have seen, he seems to have died 2 days after they had crossed into Rwanda. That was the kind of person, frankly, that Museveni felt very comfortable with. That he could have very easily done business with him. And as a matter of fact, there are even a lot of Rwandans who say that Rwigema was so good that if Rwigema was actually the guy who is in charge of Rwanda today, that we wouldn't be seeing, or talking about what we are talking about today. That one, I don't know. Now, Kagame, obviously, yeah, he has good reason to look at Museveni as his big brother also, because, again, like we said, they used to be together in the same outfit, the NRA. But the relationship, frankly, was about master-servant, so to speak, because you had a President Museveni as president, commander-in-chief of the armed forces and what have you. Kagame was a major in that army, working in intelligence and all that kind of stuff.
But now they share the same rank.
That is true.
Yeah.
They now share the same rank. They should be able to have mutual respect. But right now, it looks like that mutual respect now has probably turned into a sort of mutual distrust.
What are you talking about tomorrow in Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow, Straight Talk Africa, we are going to be looking at Women's Day. We're going to look at women and see whether or not so far they have really been making some progress. There are people who say they have actually made remarkable progress. And so we'll be having women talking about where they are coming from, where they are, and where they are heading.
We have less than a minute. What can Rwandans and Ugandans do at this point?
You know, I remember I was born in a family where my father was a church warden. So there are times when they would say that if you are in a situation like that, if you find yourself in a situation like that, what you have to do really is to get saved if you are religious. In this particular case, sincerely. And I'm saying this from the deepest, better part of the bottom of my Kavale heart and soul, which is almost like a border town of Rwanda and Uganda. The two principals need to reach out to each other. They need to talk and figure out how to accept the fact that they may not actually be friends, but they are condemned to living together. And therefore, they should respect the fact that they occupy those areas, and not only as individuals, but really they have to think about the people that they lead.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.
Thank you.
Bye.